Hello, I'm Scott Douglas, and I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Education on the University of British Columbia's Okanagan campus. I'm also the series director of Academic Inquiry, four books that focus on writing English for academic purposes, and they're published by Oxford University Press. Today, we're going to be thinking about exploring principles for EAP materials development and design, and this is the first of 6 videos looking at some different principles. And we'll be taking examples from academic inquiry to illustrate those principles. So the big question for today is this: what are some key principles for EAP materials development? So I've been trying to brainstorm a bunch of principles and what informed my own career as a writer of EAP materials. And today we're going to have a look at these 3. We're going to look at activating background knowledge, motivational design, and comprehensible input. So why are we doing this? So for me, I think that materials, when we're developing materials, they should be grounded in principles that are related to exactly how people acquire an additional language. And these principles, where do they come from? Well, they can come from the research, but they can also come from the personal, practical knowledge of teachers themselves. And we have to look at, well, what do researchers and teachers agree on? And from this, we can come up with a list of basic principles that can inform good materials development as well as the choosing of good materials. The goal of this series of videos is to make these principles explicit so that the viewers of these videos can create their own materials as well as judge materials and see whether they would be useful for their students or not. So I've been posting some ideas for principles for EAP materials writing on Twitter under the hashtag EAP materials writing. And yeah, I think I've put up 27 tweets related to this topic. So right now we're going to just look at 3 of those principles together. So the first principle I thought we would look at is activating background knowledge. So how do people learn? Well, people learn when they're able to map new information on what they already know. And so one of our jobs as teachers is to get students thinking about what they already know about a topic in order to prepare them to deal with the materials at hand. It's a little bit like if you go to a library and you want to look up questions about biology and you're curious about maybe cell structure. Well, you're going to walk over to the section on biology first, and you're going to find where those books are before you start answering the question. This is a little bit what we're doing. We're walking students towards where they can find the answers to the questions. For example, when you're creating EAP materials, you're always going to have an opener or a warmer that's going to connect the topic at hand with what the students already know about the topic. So for example, in this unit here, it's a unit on geography. We're going to start off, and then it's comparing different regions of Canadian geography. We're going to start off first about students thinking about what they already know about geography. Once we found out what they already know, then we can then start working on what do they want to know? Where are the gaps in that knowledge, and how are we going to fill those gaps? Now, so once we've sort of thought about activating background knowledge, we know that's one of our key principles. Another key principles for material development and design for me is motivational design. So when I'm creating materials, I'm always thinking about students' needs, interests, and abilities, and how I can make the materials motivating for them. For me, one of the best models of motivational design that has informed my work is Keller's idea of the ARCS model. So for Keller, if you want your materials to be motivating, there's a certain number of things that have to happen. The first thing is that you have to be able to catch students' attention, right? So you have to make them quickly aware of what's going on, and they have to be focused on the tasks at hand. The next thing, after you have their attention, you have to see if the materials are relevant to what the students are learning and relevant to the own lived experiences of the students. So the materials need to connect to the students some way, either to their immediate needs or their future needs. Also, if you want your materials to be motivating for students, the students need to be confident that they will be able to use those materials. Materials that are too difficult are quickly going to become demotivating. So it's finding that sweet spot where you're challenging students just enough so that they know they can complete the activities, but it's still worthwhile. Finally, the last thing that you need to think about in terms of motivational design, according to Keller, is satisfaction. And so will students feel satisfied after using those materials. So sometimes it's a matter of, in the materials, pointing out to students, what is it that you know now that you didn't know before? Or what is it, taking time to make it explicit what they can do that they couldn't do before. So here's a little bit of an example of especially that last point of satisfaction. So when I'm creating materials, I like to make sure that I have embedded in those materials opportunities for students to engage in self-assessment. So they can now look and see quantifiably, what is it that I now know? What did I get out of this unit? Or what is the new vocabulary that I got out of this unit? So that after class, if somebody said to a student, so what did you learn in class today? They'd be able to specifically say something like, oh, I learned how to use a Venn diagram to brainstorm similarities and differences. Or, oh, I learned a new word. I learned the word exhaustion today, and now I'm able to use it. And when they can concretely see what it is they've learned, that helps promote motivation. The third principle we're going to talk about today is this principle of comprehensible input. And so this stems from Krashen's ideas of how languages are learned. So for Krashen, languages are learned when we understand what it is we're reading or hearing. And so in terms of materials, when you're developing your materials, you want materials that are understandable and materials that convey messages to students, but they're not going to be so difficult that it's not going to make any sense to them. But you still want to challenge them. So you're trying to put together materials that are just slightly beyond what students could do on their own. And so, for example, here, this is an example of a compare and contrast essay. Well, this is the kind of essay that students could be expected to write at this level. So when we're giving writing models and things such as that, we want students to be able to understand them. Sure, we could use maybe essays that we've written ourselves or essays from famous Canadians like Peter Zosky or something like that, but the students might not be able to understand them, and then that's not going to provide comprehensible input. So when you're creating your materials, you're constantly asking yourself, are these materials appropriate for this level? What will the students be able to get out of them? And so those are three of the principles that I wanted to talk about today: activating background knowledge, motivational design, and comprehensible input. If you're interested in more principles, check out the rest of our videos. And thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. Here are some references as well to what we've been talking about today.